Okay then, 1985 Deadly Northern Lights, carrying on with this. Same scenario as before. Oops, try not to clatter into things. Same scenario as before. The gates of fire, first scenario. But this time I am using all the optional rules available in the rule set, which includes some detailed supply rules which replace the sort of trace supply, and also weather, which could have a significant impact on how things go, as well as chemical and nuclear weapons. That's another rule that's here. Recon aircraft we're using in full. Yeah, lots of stuff. So I've reset in terms of, rearranging all the troops back on the board. We've got everything over here on bases again. Taking a slightly different approach with the UK forces. We've based all our navy out of Rosyth, and we're going to use land transport over here on the line of communication map to get these forces that initially start in UK2. We're not going to base any shipping there. We're going to use that helicopter there to fly a mission, fly everything up to UK1, and from there into the Rosyth naval base, and from there we can ship out into the Norwegian Sea. So yeah, slightly different approach there. Also changing is the use of supply tokens instead of trace supply. So you can see some supply tokens I've got ready down here, because we're having to think about moving supply around the map rather than setting up convoy lanes to trace. And so I'm doing at the moment pre-war movement, where both sides get to essentially make some moves prior to turn one. And so you can see two stacks of Russian submarines out here already crossing from the Barents Sea into the Norwegian Sea, and we've also got a Soviet Union task force up here, and that has got destroyers, frigates, a light cruiser destroyer, and two transports, two transports, and I've got 16 points of supply in here. Annoyingly, I'm actually using OCS supply markers because the supply counters that come in the game only go up to units of 4, and when you're trying to transport 16 or 20, or as the UK are going to be trying to transport possibly over 30 supply in these transports, they've got a 38 capacity in here. They'll be carrying some troops, but they could easily be carrying 30 supply. Doing that with 8 counters is somewhat painful. So I've pulled some supply counters out of OCS, and I've got some 15s and 20s and some denominations that actually make sense for the game. So yeah, slightly disappointing, but it is what it is. I've got the OCS ones to hand. I'm sure most people who are going to venture into this kind of game will have things that they can use to top up the supply, the counter mix. But yeah, there it is. So I've got OCS supply and supply counters from this game kind of mixed together in here. So the standard supply markers you get with the game, so these ones, and there's my OCS ones I've thrown in the counter tray to top up. Right, anyway, pre-war moves, Soviet task force round there. We've moved an infantry division. We've not split the division up, we've just moved the full division forward with some artillery, ready to knock that garrison out, and we haven't really given it anywhere to go either, and it's now in a zone of control of ours. So yeah, that's going to get messy very quickly. And so now I think I am just doing NATO pre-war moves. So Deadly Northern Lights, the gates of fire, using the full rules, detailed rules, and I've just done the sort of pre-turn one moves again. and for both sides. NATO just created a task force and loaded some troops onto some ships, but weren't able to get much else done. So we're now going into turn one, and the first thing we do with the detailed rules is roll for weather. Now, the initial Soviet plan last time round was to use a transport to drop this airborne brigade right next to Tromsø, and then move and then attack into the garrison in Tromsø. I was worried about supplying that, but the full detailed supply rules give units embedded supply. For Warsaw Pact, they'd get 3 ammo and 3 fuel. So I was worried about airdropping this supply in, because I just read the rules that said only a third of it arrives unless you air supply into an airbase. So that 6 supply there would only turn into 2 supply, which wouldn't be very helpful for a brigade-sized unit. But actually the embedded supply will allow them to get done what they need to, provided the weather is good enough for them to airdrop at all. So we're going to have a look at this weather table. We're in July. We're in the Arctic zone. If I come down here, you can see Arctic zone there. So all the map is up over there. We're well into the Arctic zone. So we'll have a quick roll on the weather table to see what happens. And we've got a 10, and we have good weather. So the Warsaw Pact can go ahead with its plan and have a look at that airdrop. So we're now going to move into, I think, establishing air superiority areas, and then into the Warsaw Pact turn. Deadly Northern Lights then. Thin Red Line games. Here with the Gates of Fire with the full rules. And the Warsaw Pact have made their moves to, sorry about the camera shake, the Warsaw Pact have made their moves to capture Tromsø, so they did their air drop into here. Well, they spotted it with a recon first. I didn't quite know whether that was required for an airdrop, but they did anyway. So we spotted it with a recon flight, airdropped in here, moved in here, and then assaulted the garrison base. No resistance was met, so we've captured that, and then our fleet moved in and dropped off our task force. Where is it? Up here. Moved in, dropped off as much supply as we could get there, and moved away again. So we've now got our airborne brigade in there. We've got 13 supply in here with us, and the naval base is damaged because it gets damaged by the assault. I had a quick back and forth with the designer about whether you needed to repair that damage in order to score the points, and you don't. So that's currently 12 points for the Russians, and actually I think it's 17, because I think Tromsø counts as a strategic location according to some rules here. If I find the victory point stuff in here, the military point table shows it's an urban hex worth 2, it's a naval base and therefore worth 10, but then over here there's also strategic locations, and it's listed down here. A couple of the airfields are listed as well, but you can see somewhere in here Tromsø, there it is, listed as a 5-point strategic location. So I think all in all that's 17 points for the Warsaw Pact, and they've got enough supply in here for like 5, I think 5 or maybe more. I think this, let's have a look, this stockpiled supply, that's a brigade that will use 3 for moving or fighting, and it's got 3 inherent. You can see Warsaw Pact has got 3 ammo and fuel inherent, so with 13 supply in there, that's 4, it's got 3 inherent, it's got enough supply now for 7 combats, so you know, properly stockpiled in there. And now we're wondering what else to do. So to give you an indication of that kind of thinking, I was looking at how to capture this airfield here. which is quite well defended, or at least it's got a garrison in there, so we can't just walk in. And I'd like to get my infantry division and artillery round there to make sure of it. So I've got an artillery unit and a big old infantry, mechanised infantry division here, 10B13. That's a tough unit. So these wiped out a garrison that was in here, and we've started moving around through all this rough terrain. And with 3 inherent fuel, we can make 3 20-point moves before we run out of fuel, and that gets us across, I figure, to about here. I think if we take the right route through here and then across all this Arctic plain, we get to about here. And so I've airdropped in some more airborne forces in here and started to build a supply depot here with airlifted and airdropped supply. I'll bring it in however I can, planes and helicopters. This thing requires 6 supply for a fuel point, so we'll run out of fuel somewhere around here, and I'm hoping that I can air in 6 supply into here to provide it with the final fuel point it needs to push through here and make an attack on this airfield. So that's my plan there. I think there's going to be some reinforcements come on here as well with the supply head and whatever. I think they're going to be largely irrelevant to my plans. But I think my plans revolve mainly around taking Tromsø, which we've done, and making a late attack on this airfield. I may find time to ship some special forces in here if we run out of things to do with the air points, but I'm more interested in getting air supply in here via air at the moment, and we'll take it from there. So yeah, a few little bits of tidy up and pootling around to do maybe. I'll look for other interesting things to do, but I think that may well be it for the Warsaw Pact. And now we've got a tough planning operation to do for NATO to try and figure out how we get troops, supplied troops, to contest Tromsø, which is obviously the key spot, without getting taken out by Warsaw Pact naval bombers and all these submarines matched up against them. And this task force, I think he's going to give us the slip. I don't think we've got any opportunity to catch that up. It'll be long gone by the time we get here, so I don't think we're going to have any naval units to score points from either. So, as I said in a previous preamble, I think we've got to give much more consideration to how we actually get ourselves into Tromsø and take it back. Let's see how this goes. Well, I did find one more thing to do with the Warsaw Pact. We had a Special Forces unit with a helicopter in this airbase over here, and so flew those Special Forces out over here, captured this urban hex and based our helicopters there, which I think is legal. It's not entirely clear to me, but it seems that you can base a helicopter in a hex that's friendly controlled, and it wasn't friendly controlled until we took it with the Special Forces, but I'm assuming that this is allowed. Otherwise I'm not sure what you do with helicopters apart from move troops in your own territory. So yeah, we've dropped some Special Forces into Alta, and then we're basing our helicopter there. We're all out of supply, we've got no supply. It's interesting though that the game gives you these tools when you get into this detailed supply situation. You get these tools. So for example, dropping Special Forces to take control of a hex, airborne units to take control of a hex, which then allows us to drop supply there to build a depot to supply something that we know is coming in future terms. It's you can be quite creative in how you do stuff. And I was just thinking about this and thinking that we've probably got a transport with amphibious capability that we could use to probably bring supply in from Murmansk and use its amphibious abilities to drop supply in there for them, even though it's not a port. So there are lots of ways of using the tools at your disposal in this game, by the looks of things. Whether they're effective ways is another matter, but it's fascinating to try and puzzle your way through how you can use all the tools at your disposal to get things done. Anyway, the Soviets are clearly with the upper hand here, and I'm moving into NATO's turn. Okay, Deadly Northern Lights, the Gates of Fire, first scenario, using the full rules. I'm doing the NATO turn, and you know the NATO side have a significant puzzle to solve here. Tromsø has fallen there, that's 17 points to the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact have also taken a area over just off map over here, worth 2 points, that's 19 points. And are marching towards this airfield over here. It's very, very tricky to work out how to make these points back, because the Warsaw Pact Navy is going to be long gone by the time we're able to engage it. We've just had a task force arrive on the south edge of the map here. The first, this is full of British ships, but they don't have the movement capability to get into here. That would take another 2 moves, that would be 10, and then it would cost them 6 to try and patrol or to try and intercept this task force. They don't have the move, they only have 12. And so we have to look at how to try and recapture Tromsø, because we can't get points from sinking Soviet shipping anymore. Or we can't count on it. Maybe some submarines, but they're worth a point each. So that's not a reliable way of making the score up. Tromsø is in a difficult spot. You know, it's located here on a kind of peninsula. There's ocean around a lot of it, so you can't attack him from these sides. As we saw from the airborne landings, the only reliable nearby area to do an airborne or an amphibious landing is this hex here, and it means sailing shipping round into this area and then down into this area and then landing. That's a long way under Soviet air cover. That doesn't look very very pleasant. So then I started looking at options that didn't involve an airborne or amphibious landing here, because I mean, airborne I don't want to do because the Russians have got so much air power in the region that we're almost always going to be at a disadvantage. So I'd like to do an amphibious landing somewhere and then walk round to Tromsø, and I think this spot here where the Norwegians currently have this battalion might be a good area. It's rough one terrain which we're allowed to do an amphibious landing into, and then we could put some supply there and have enough supply to be in supply as we made, hopefully as we made an assault on Tromsø. And it might allow us to make multiple attacks. Yeah, we'll see. But I think it's the only viable option, because if the Russians really think about it, and they are thinking about it, Tromsø is now a garrisoned base for their side, so they could move this brigade out and put it here, and therefore cut any sort of attempt for amphibious landings or airborne landings out, or airdrops out, because you can't do amphibious landings into enemy units or enemy garrisons. So that would preclude NATO doing an amphibious landing here or here, and we'd be forced to walk round anyway. I'm rather worried, from the NATO point of view, that if the Soviets do that, they'll have zones of control which also stop us from accessing Tromsø, and they might hold us up significantly, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So I think what we're looking at doing is an amphibious landing here with as much supply as we can get in, and walking round, and therefore not relying on helicopters and helicopter transports, with the Soviets having so much air support in the area. But this is still really dangerous, still really dangerous. And what's happened now is that we've turned up here with 8 movement points spent on the south edge of the map, having set off in the pre-war movement phase. And this Task Force 7 here is now a target for the Russians or the Warsaw Pact, and the Warsaw Pact are wondering whether to attack it or not. And I'm sort of forcing them to make a decision before I reveal or think about what we're going to do next. We've got 2 options. We could immediately head for this area, but we won't have sufficient movement points to make the amphibious landing, because that takes 4. Or we could debark our amphibious units here on this island and gather here and wait to see how things develop before we push over here. And one reason to prefer that is that the Russians have naval surveillance markers in here, and because this is within range of their strike aircraft, whereas this is not. So yeah, I think what would happen here, because both sides can announce air missions during each other's movement phases, that's not the way I was really conducting things during the first playthrough. But the reality is that it's a very fluid game system where you can at pretty much any point say, okay, I want to run an air mission now, and during either your own movement phase or the opponent's movement phase. So as this task force turned up in here, the Warsaw Pact player can say, I want to run an air mission against that. Now, as the Warsaw Pact player, I might wait to see whether I get the NATO player to move in here, where I've got, like I say, naval surveillance and better strike range. As the NATO player, I've decided actually that I'm going to base in here for now, and then worry about getting over onto mainland Norway at a later date. So I'm going to use my last 4 movement points on an amphibious debarkation in this hex, but then what we're going to do is get some Warsaw Pact air power coming in. Okay, so with the British debarked in this hex and the task force just sitting there, what's now happened is the Warsaw Pact have announced a mission into this mega hex with 6 strike squadrons and 3 escort squadrons, and we're going to get some combat. The NATO have to decide how to respond to that, and NATO are going to try and intercept, and we're going to try and scramble the Harriers off the carrier in there. So we've got some somewhere on here. So we've got some Harriers down here. They're not that great, but they might as well. And we are going to scramble 2 squadrons of F-16s out of Bodo here at a range of 1-2 megahexes. Previously, I thought my reading of the rules was that you could only intercept if you were either on a base in the hex being attacked, or in a part of air superiority cover in the mega hex being attacked. But I now think that's wrong. You know, it says something about the only eligible fighters having to be launched from either the air superiority or area or an eligible base, and I think an eligible base is one within range. And the other thing that makes me think this is because there's an intercept roll, and there are modifiers for how many megahexes you are away from the action. So we can see down here a table that says flight path length, and then a modifier for NATO or others. So the fighters on the carrier are going to get a +4 on their die roll. On the intercept, the fighters out of Bodo are going to get +2s on their dice rolls. And we can see over here that interception will happen on a roll of 9 or more, and we go squadron by squadron to see what happens. So let's give it some rolls. The aircraft carriers Harriers are rolling a 6, and they've got a +4, so that's a 10, and they will intercept. And the 2 lots of F-16s are getting an 11 and 12 and have got +2s, so they've got 13 and 14, and they are intercepting, and we're going to get a really interesting combat about to happen. Okay, so this is how our battle is lining up. We've got the Soviets, they've got an ECM aircraft in here, which I had announced as a escort. I'm not sure whether that's correct or not, but anyway, that can't be shot down or attacked, but it's just in the area, providing electronic countermeasure, which gives the Soviets the Warsaw Pact some bonuses. And then they've got 2 escorting squadrons of these Su-15 TMs 970, but they're at extended range, so they're 770s. And intercepting them are the 2 Norwegian squadrons of F-16s 12, 10, 4, and the Harriers that were scrambled from the Invincible. So we've got air-to-air combat, and the strike mission itself is made up of these 6 squadrons, Tu-22 and 3s, Tu-16 K-28s, and some Tu-16Ks. So a whole range of bombers there. Again, I don't think these have got RN, so these are not at extended range. These are RN, these are RN, these are RN, these are all RN, so they've got these will not count as extended range, and they will get their full values to attack, and they've all got the standoff capability as well, which means they will not have to take flak from the task force for their attacks. So that's all a bit potent. Let's see what happens in the air-to-air combat. I'm not going to try and do it on camera because it's just too fiddly. I'll come back when I've worked my way through it. So the outcome here was good for the NATO side. The 2 F-16s did a step loss and 2 damaged steps on the escorting fighters. We didn't try and intercept the bombers. We took the view that they hadn't found our task force yet, and they needed to make the interception roll, and we gambled on them failing the interception roll, and that gamble paid off. The Warsaw Pact rolled an 8 to intercept, +2 for an airstrike, but they didn't make the 13 they needed to find our task force. And so we just managed to do some damage to some of the fighters without reply. So that was really good. And I think that just about brings us to the end of the NATO turn. Everything has moved that we've got to move. All the British forces and task forces have been moving. We've taken up defensive positions with ground forces. You can see these hedgehog markers across the board where we've dug in defensive positions where we can, and we're going into turn 2.